Hello, welcome back into another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast, presented by Valley Insider of the Rivals Network, covering Penn State athletics. I am Dylan Callaghan-Croley, beat writer, recruiting analyst over at Valley Insider. I'm joined by my co-host Anthony Hazan here as we recap the Penn State's PeachBowl loss to Ole Miss, 38-25 in Atlanta on Saturday afternoon. We had Marty on to preview the game. We now have Anthony on to recap the game, talk a little bit about the Penn State heading into the offseason a little bit more. Anthony, 38-25, but I don't think the final score nor the box score, which shows Penn State finishing with just 30 less yards than Ole Miss. Ole Miss's 540 yards, 540 to 510, really tell the story of this game. Penn State was outmatched in this game. They were down I believe, through either opt-outs or snap counts and then injuries, at least 8 starters in this game just didn't have the defense that it took to stop a ferocious Ole Miss offense that had just way too much talent in the passing game for them to handle. And then the offense it was the big game offense that we saw much out of Penn State this year. For 3 quarters, it struggled to get anything going outside of a couple, broken plays by Ole Miss's defense. And then in the fourth quarter, late against softer coverage, they find some success. Out of their 510 yards, I believe over 200 of it came in the fourth quarter alone. I think the best way to put it for Penn State fans is a discouraging loss to end the season. Thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's tough, like you said, to evaluate this game because I think it is a much different story if Penn State had their full squad or even most of their full squad for the entire game. I don't know if they still would have won just because Ole Miss's offense was on fire.
Agreed.
I still think they would have had a tremendous game, even if they had guys like King and Dixon and Chop and Jacobs back there for the entire game. But, I think it would have been much, much closer, than what it was, with the chance that Penn State could have won outright because that defense at full strength is just that good. But, yeah, it's, like I said, really hard to evaluate. The defense I'm not really going to focus on just because, it just wasn't the same defense we saw all year.
Yeah,
and not only
when you're talking about the amount of guys they were missing on both sides of the ball, but especially defensively, that wasn't the Penn State defense that we saw this year. That was a shell of that defense. When you're missing your top 2 cornerbacks, your top 2 defensive ends for the most part, Job Robinson did not play. Disa Isaac played the first half. Curtis Jacobs played the first half. And then down on top of that, Abdul Carter goes down with an injury early in the game after being shot blocked, a missed call, and was playing maybe at 65, 70% the rest of the way. He could not move. And that was just on the defense side of the ball. When you consider all that, it's frankly impressive they only gave up 38 points.
Yeah, so not really going to focus too much on the defense there. That was what it was. There was nothing that they could have done about that. Kind of like a hand tied behind your back situation with the defense. Right. Offensively is where I think most people are frustrated.
Yeah, obviously let's start here.
Let's start here. Let's start with
you. So I think the first thing to really note here is Penn State started this game off really well on the ground. Their first drive of the game, they had 60 yards of rushing. Nick Singleton and Gadron Allen both had 10 carries in the first quarter, I think, combined. And then the rest of the way they had eight combined carries the rest of the way. They weren't able to stay with the run. Ole Miss did make some really quality adjustments after that first drive, but all the issues for Penn State this year go back to the same root cause, and that's the passing attack. It wasn't until the fourth quarter when a Penn State wide receiver caught a pass in this game. Ultimately, Harrison Wallace third finished with 4 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown before being injured late in the game. An unfortunate trend for Wallace. Liam Clifford had 3 receptions for 25 yards, and then the only other receiver targeted in the game was Keandre Lambert-Smith, who only recorded 21 snaps, in the game combined. Somebody who was just, well, let's be honest, not a factor for the last 3 games of Penn State's season, which I think may say a little bit about the future of him with the program. Dante Cephas in the game did not play in the game. That, I think, could be an indication of what his future may hold as well. I mean, this Penn State wide receiver room was obviously the big question mark going into the offseason, PeachBowl or not. But after the PeachBowl, I think there's just even more questions and concerns about Penn State's wide receiver unit than there was even 3 weeks ago, because there's not much here for Drew Allar, for Andy Koltanicki, or anybody to really work with right now. And this is a position, and we'll talk about the transfer portal in a little, that they need to if they want to be a true Big Ten competitor next year, they need to land at least 2, if not 3, wide receivers in the portal who can step in and make some sort of impact in 2024.
Yeah, just an absolutely embarrassing day for the wide receivers in a season where they grossly underwhelmed. I think this was kind of the cherry on top for them. I agree with you 100% that, you got to find at least they might only take one more guy, because you assume at this point Fleming is probably just going to enroll.
Join Fleming, no new inside information there, but I mean, I think we, as well as many others, have been pretty frank that we feel very good about Penn State's chances of landing Julian Fleming. And yeah, this is being recorded January 2nd, will go up January 3rd. So by the time I'm posting, there's 5 days until the semester starts. I think at this point, he's just going to show up on campus, and that's going to be it.
Yeah. So, maybe they only take one more guy. I think ideally they should get at least 2 more, because for them to not have a single catch until the 4th quarter is absolutely embarrassing.
Yep.
You can listen, there's a lot of problems with this offense right now. You can look at the scheme. You can look at Drew and the things that he needs to work on, and there are plenty, and we can get into that too if you want. But I continue to think and believe that the biggest issue with this offense is the lack of playmakers at wide receiver. There were just multiple times where there was just no separation.
And that's been the common theme from week 1.
Yeah. I mean, Keandre Lambert-Smith has just been the great disappearing act the last couple of games. He started off the season pretty solid. After the Michigan game, for the Michigan game on, he just was non-existent in this offense. I think he has 2 catches since the Michigan game, over 4 games, which is just unbelievable for a player who I still think is talented. So just an incredibly disappointing effort. I don't know what happened with Dante Cephas behind the scenes, because he looked like he was healthy. So for him to not even get a snap in that game tells me that something was going on. And James had some pretty interesting quotes, like you're about to say.
Yeah, James alluded to just the fact that over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of, practices and a lot of competition. And it's just the way basically the depth chart kind of fell in place over the last few weeks. But I mean, I'm not sure that really says a ton about those that finished ahead of him on the depth chart and into the PeachBowl, because obviously it ultimately did not make a huge difference. But Keandre Lambert-Smith, you look at the last 3 games for him, 2 receptions, 28. Last 3 games, 2 receptions, 28 yards. And that was after recording, in the 4 games prior to that, 8 for 95, 6 for 96, 6 for 52, 6 for 30. That 6 for 30 coming against UMass. Up until that Maryland game, he recorded at least 3 receptions every game. He recorded 4 receptions in all but 1 game. And then over the last 3 games, starting with that Michigan game, he's been non-existent. How does a player like that just disappear from your offense? Because before, he was one of the top wide receivers in the Big Ten when it came to receiving yards, and he completely disappeared down the stretch for Penn State. And, I think that played a big factor in their loss to Michigan. I think that played a factor in their loss to Ole Miss on Saturday.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. I don't know what happens with him and Penn State moving forward. We'll see what he decides to do. I know what I think he should do, but ultimately it's his decision.
Yep.
Cephas not playing, and the comments Franklin made kind of tells me that they're probably going to
Yeah,
go separate
and
ways. We'll see what happens there.
and Cephas was one of the first players off the field following the PeachBowl loss as
Yeah,
well.
I don't think he stuck around for the alma mater. I think he trotted right back to the locker room while the players were doing the alma mater. I
Right.
saw, so that kind of tells a story right there to me. So,
And Keandre Lambert Smith. I'm gonna double check that before you talk, just so I get my facts straight. But I mean, you look at this wide receiver room going into next year, and we'll include Lambert Smith and Cephas for now, though we don't know what either's future holds. But who in this wide receiver room can Penn State really trust next year? To be a part of that rotation and give them reliable snaps out there. Harrison Wallace III, I mean, has shown flashes of reliability, but his biggest problem is that he's unreliable from a health standpoint. It seems like any chance he's gotten the last 2 years in terms of positive momentum on the field, he gets bit by the injury bug, and then we don't see him for a handful of weeks. 7 games played this year. As I said, he showed something at the end of the Peach Bowl, but then got hurt again. Liam Clifford may be their best true pass catcher right now, but he's not the fastest kid out there. He's a quality possession wide receiver, but possession wide receivers are great if you have the deep threats and the explosive guys to go along with them. He doesn't pose much of a threat as just a possession wide receiver right now in the current Penn State offense. Christian Driver's obviously gone. Malik McClain, what are you getting out of him? I mean, he showed a lot of promise early on this season, had that tough game against Illinois, and then kind of, was up and down throughout the rest of the year. Amari Evans, we saw more of after the departure of Mike Yursich, but we didn't get to see much out of him. And then there's Caden Saunders, who we're waiting for it to click, but it has not clicked yet. We're going to be entering year 3 for Caden Saunders, redshirt sophomore season. This was a guy who was a top 100 prospect, a guy they thought could have, made an immediate impact in 2022, wasn't ready to go in 2022, didn't really show what you wanted to see in 2023. Is it going to click for him in 2024? I mean, there's just so many questions about this wide receiver room heading into the offseason. I don't know. Marcus Higgins and Andy Koltanicki have their hands full, and I'm not jealous of the position that either are in heading into the offseason when looking at this wide receiver room, because even if they were able to add a Julian Fleming, there's a lot of questions about who your number 2, who your number 3 is going to be, let alone when you go on beyond that.
Oh, yeah. I think you could make an argument that outside of Iowa, this was the worst wide receiver room in the Power 5 in terms of production and in terms of what they put out there on the field. I mean, does that room still have some potential moving forward? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think Harrison Wallace still has another gear he can hit. I think Amari Evans, if he puts it together, could be a really good deep threat and a decent receiver. But again, he hasn't really put that together yet. Caden Saunders, what's his ceiling? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, like you said, Liam Clifford has really good hands and he's a good possession guy, but I think he's limited beyond that.
Agreed.
So I think there's roles for those guys on the team next year, but I think a lot of those guys are going into prove it years where if you don't start putting it together, they're going to be on their way out as well. And I think you're going to have a couple of guys, that are already going to be on their way out this year. So I think they're going to try to retool that room a little bit and then, hopefully bring in at least one more, if not 2 more guys to shore up that room going into next year a little bit.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. That being said, the passing game, let's be honest, it is not all the wide receivers' fault. There is plenty of blame to go around, and that includes with Drew. It's really hard, in my opinion, to evaluate Drew's first season as a starting quarterback, because the wide receiver unit, as we've said, was pretty terrible for most of the season for Penn State. So how do you probably evaluate Drew? I think there is still a ton of promise in Drew as a quarterback. I still think this is a kid who's going to be able to become a pretty high NFL draft pick, barring a complete disaster of a season next year. Is he a three and out guy? Maybe not, but I still think this is a guy, whether it's in 2025 or 2026 draft, that's going pretty high. Whether that's first round, second round, or third round, I think he's a day one or day two pick down the road. That being said, there's still plenty of things he has to work on, and I think the one area that is really probably on the minds of everybody is just that confidence. He doesn't seem to have that confidence right now that he needs to have to make the level of throws that Penn State needs him to make. If you look at Saturday's game, on the opposite side, Jackson Dart had a phenomenal game. The Penn State defense wasn't great, but Jackson Dart was making NFL level throws throughout the game, and his receivers were making tremendous catches as well. But Jackson Dart was thrown with confidence, thrown with poise, and looked the part of a guy who could be a potential high draft pick in the near future. Drew just this year, at any point outside of maybe that first game against West Virginia when he hit that 74-yard touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith, did he ever look truly that confident in himself or in the offense? Maybe against Michigan State, but I think that's maybe where he needs to improve most with this offseason. I think improvement there will help with a lot of his other issues, but just what are your thoughts on Drew's first season here? The confidence obviously needs to improve, but the footwork needs to improve. The mechanics need to improve. I don't think this season was a disaster by any means for him. I think it was a very good season, all things considered. But if Penn State's going to go where they want to go next year, he needs to take that next step.
Yeah, I think personally the biggest thing holding Drew back is the mental side of his game.
I would agree.
I think at this point it's fairly obvious that in bigger games he feels the pressure a little bit more. Maybe he gets inside his own head. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and speculate, but from the outside looking in, it does appear like he lets the big moments affect him more than we've seen from other Penn State quarterbacks in the past. So I think that is a big side of his game that he needs to work on. But at the same time, it's hard to fully evaluate Drew just because, again, his receivers were just so poor this year.
Right.
And you might sit there and say, well, a good quarterback should be able to scheme open his receivers or throw open his receivers. And to some degree, sure. But at the same time, receivers have to be able to get separation.
Right.
And they have to give you – and I'm sure there are just some windows that Drew just missed, and I'm sure that's part of it. But it does feel like there isn't the trust that needs to be there. Like you watch – like we talked about this before. You watch Washington. You watch – like Texas, you watch some of these other offensive teams, and man, it's just night and day different watching them throw the football, watching their wide receivers get open, like watching their quarterbacks hit them in stride. It's beautiful to watch, honestly. And, Penn State didn't have that this year. And, Drew, like I said, he's got plenty of things to work on himself. He kind of feels ghosts in the pocket a little bit. He's got happy feet. His footwork gets thrown off. That's when his accuracy starts to go. But his wide receivers also need to run the right routes consistently. So it goes hand in hand.
And we should mention his stats: 59.9% completion percentage, which is very similar to where Sean Clifford was for his career. 2,631 yards, 25 touchdowns, and just 2 interceptions. Also had 2 fumbles. If you adjust his completion percentage for the drops this season, that completion percentage rises to 67.8. So, this was a very accurate passer for most of the year. I don't think the accuracy is the issue here, though. Was he off at times? Absolutely. But for the most part, he is as accurate as they usually come in college football. I think with the confidence, and yes, he did miss windows, but I think with the confidence, and this goes to Penn State being risk averse. let me ask you this first. Do you think Penn State at times this year and Drew this year were too worried about being risk averse and that it would hold the offense back? Because there was
Yes.
plenty of opportunities this year he had when it would come to hidden deep passing attempts in which he simply did not take and decided to check down to either a short or intermediate pass, which fine, you may get 5 yards, you may get a first down, but you potentially passed up the touchdown because there was a little bit of a higher chance of an interception. That can't happen next year. Drew absolutely needs to take that next step next year in which he has the confidence to say, screw it, I'm going to let it rip and try to hit this deep ball. If it works out, you're going to have a huge explosive play. If it doesn't, it's either falling to the ground or there's a small chance it's ended up being intercepted. This year, I'm surprised they didn't do it more often. He didn't do it more often than not because you had one of the best defenses in the country out there to back you up if you did turn the ball over. I mean, you have a great defense. So if you did turn it over on interception deep, it would basically be a punt. Next season, you're not going to have that same level of defense. I think it will still be a very good defense, but it won't be, top 5 in the nation good, most likely. So I do think Drew needs, and the Penn State offense next year need to be willing to take that deep ball threat more because, I mean, if defenses don't have to be scared that you're going to throw that deep ball, I mean, it makes it so much easier to defend a passing attack when it's going to be, within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, it almost felt like we had that conversation in the middle of the year that, like, does Drew need to throw his first interception to kind of get it out of his system a little bit? Like, it almost felt like he was trying to avoid the turnover a little bit too much. And you make the perfect point. That defense was so freaking good. If you turn the ball over on a deep ball, who cares? Your defense is good enough that it won't matter. And even if it does, they'll just stop him on the next drive. Like you got to take some risks in college football. Like, again, you look at like Washington last night, they were chucking it deep almost every other play. Now, obviously they had elite playmakers that Penn State doesn't have, but still, you got to take that chance from time to time. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I understand that you don't want to get too risky. You don't want to throw too many interceptions, but at the same time, you gotta, Penn State's offense, especially like 2016, 2017, their bread and butter was hitting that deep ball, like throwing it up to guys like Godwin and Gesicki. And obviously those guys aren't walking back in the door. And again, it just comes back to that point. But at the same time, that's how they got those big wins. That's how they won the Big Ten title was, just Trace just said, screw it. Gesicki's down there somewhere. Blacknell's down there somewhere, whatever. Yeah. Drew has to have that mindset of, screw it. I just got to chuck it deep and see what happens.
Yeah, and I honestly believe you put Drew on most of the teams around the country. That most of the good teams around the country, similar to Penn State, he's putting up big numbers this season. If you put him in Ohio State's offense, I think he would have put up better numbers than Kyle McCord.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think I said that if Drew was on Ohio State, they might be in the playoff right now.
I agree. I still think there's a ton of talent in the kid. Was this an ideal season? No, but I mean, I think to a degree, you also just gotta have. It's unfortunate for Penn State that it resulted in 3 losses. They did not meet their goals, but he was a first-year starter. You have to let him grow, and he was not just a first-year starter. He was a first-year starter with quite a terrible wide receiver. I mean, Penn State has had great wide receivers for years, and then I said this in the season. Once they get the quarterback that has the best potential that they've had since, freshman year Hackenberg, or even sophomore year Hackenberg, they don't have the wide receivers. And I think Dad really played a factor in his development this year. We'll see what happens going forward, but I still think this is a kid who could look like a much better quarterback come next August when they go down to Morgantown and face West Virginia. I truly do believe that. Maybe he doesn't, but I still think there's a sizable jump that he can make and continue to. Maybe he's not that generational quarterback, but he can still be, a top 10 quarterback in college football.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I think he absolutely can take a step up.
But
again, I think it could be predicated on getting him some more weapons.
yes,
But
it's predicated on
we'll
that.
see.
And he can do whatever he wants to do in 8 of 12 games next year. But at the same time, when the lights are on next year against the likes of USC, UCLA, Ohio State, so 7 of 12, Wisconsin, and Washington, he needs to be ready to go in those games. He can't have performances like he did this year. Because while Penn State's wide receivers weren't great in those games, while the offense play call wasn't great, we talked about it. When the lights were on this year, he seemed to take a step back in his mechanics and his footwork and as a whole, which really affected Penn State success.
I'd argue that West Virginia game is not going to be an easy one either. We can get into it a different time. But
No, that's going to be a tough road game to start the season. But right now, it's still a game that I would expect Penn State to win.
I would too, but I'm not surprised. I won't be surprised if that team comes in ranked. Like in the back half of the top
be very good.
They had a really good year, and that's a quality team.
Be very good.
They've lost a couple pieces to the portal, so we'll see what happens with that. But that's still a decent team, and that's not going to be an easy game by any stretch, or at least not as easy as it was this year for Penn State. So,
but at the end of the day, he's going to be judged on the Nittany Lions 5 or 6 really big games next year, and he could light it up in the other games, but if he doesn't stand, if he doesn't light it up under the lights, it's not going to matter because that's where if Penn State wants to go to where they want to next year, he needs to perform at a high level in those games. That being said, I don't see anybody else being Penn State's starting quarterback in 2024. There'll be an open competition, as James Franklin says, but I'd be shocked if Drew isn't the starter next season.
Oh, he'll absolutely be the starter. I don't think anybody should be questioning that. Yeah, barring injury, of course. But, yeah, nobody should be questioning if anyone else is going to be starting a quarterback.
Now, going back to the Peach Bowl, his struggles in the game, 19 for 39, 295, 2 touchdowns. Like I said, he had the offense as a whole had a big fourth quarter against softer defense. He had 177 passing yards in the fourth quarter, 217 total yards in the fourth quarter for Penn State. The offensive line play for Penn State in the game was not the greatest. It wasn't terrible, but Drew Shelton, especially at left tackle, after it was announced not announced, but on the availability report, Olufshano was out for the game, which was a surprise. Drew Shelton really struggled at left tackle from the get-go. Hunter Norzad had a tough game. It wasn't the best day for Penn State's offensive line, which didn't help. But overall, though, still at the end of the day, Drew had his opportunities to make plays. But again, there's plenty of blame to go around. Wide receivers, offensive line. Drew, Ole Miss ended up again 12 pressures and 8 quarterback hurries on Drew, even though they only had 1 sack in the game. Now, bright sides offensively for Penn State, I think there are a few to talk about. Tyler Warren had a huge game, right? Heading into this big offseason. He's going to enter next season as the number 1 tight end, had 5 receptions, 127 yards, including a spectacular one-handed catch that he took 74 yards into the red zone. I thought he was really impressive. Anthony Dunca, the freshman offensive lineman, was really good over about 50 snaps. That was impressive. The running backs looked really good when they did get opportunities. Nick Singleton had a nice game. Katron Allen had a good game. Olavega Ione had a nice game for the most part, I thought, at left guard. So there was positives to take away from this offensive performance for Penn State, but overall it was a disappointing offensive performance in my opinion.
Yeah, let's talk about those positives a little bit. What a gift from God that Tyler Warren is coming back for another season, because he was tremendous in that game. He looked like a bona
Yep,
fide tight end one.
sure.
Um, that's
He
going to be
he could
a
be in for a
massive.
huge season next year.
That's going to be a massive help for that passing game next year. That he's going to be coming back, and if he can play like that with more consistency, yeah, he has the potential to be a first round pick in next year's draft.
And
So
he's arguably always been the most athletic tight end Penn State's had in that room over the last couple of years too. He just
yeah,
hasn't had the opportunity to showcase, and I think he showcased it this game. I think going into next season, I think, like I said, I think he could be in for a really big year next year for Penn State.
yeah, the tight end room it was always going to be healthy
Yeah,
going into next season, and it's going to be even more so with Warren back. So that's a positive if you're looking at anything right there. I thought Nick Singleton was starting to show flashes of the 2022 Nick Singleton that we didn't see all season.
he
Had
looked
some
more
really big
explosive than he
runs.
did.
His explosiveness was back. His burst was back. I think if anybody benefited the most from the Mike Yurcich firing, it was Nick Singleton. I don't know what he was doing to hold him back, but he's looked like a different player over the
Yeah,
last couple of games. So that's been great to see. I thought Allen was solid as well. Um, yeah, and Anthony Donko was the last one I wanted to hit on.
yeah,
I still think they'll probably look to bring in another tackle through the transfer portal if they can
yeah.
find the right guy. But Anthony Donko gave me a little bit of confidence that, hey, he could be that guy. With another off season of work, um, getting a lot of reps, and he'll get plenty of reps. He'll be right there in that conversation for the right tackle spot next year.
Yeah, I mean,
So
out of you look at the offensive lineman who played in the game, um, he was among the top, guys in terms of snaps. Sal Wormley, Drew Shelton, Ione all had 70 plus snaps. I don't think that's a surprise considering you expect all three of those guys. We're assuming Wormley is likely to return. You expect all three of those guys to be your starters next season. Add right guard for Wormley, add left tackle for Shelton. Ione, we'll see where he ultimately ends up. He could play guard, he could play center. But then Hunter Norzad played 54 snaps at center. He's obviously gone. But then it was Anthony Donka with 46 snaps in the game. He could
mhm.
definitely, kind of be a versatile guy who could play guard or, slide out the tackle for Penn State next year on that at right tackle.
Yeah, I remember talking about him when he originally signed with Penn State. He was a guy that kind of flew under the radar a little bit, and I think a big part of that was because he played for a really small high school. If he played at a much bigger school, I think his recruitment would have been a lot more national.
Yeah.
So Javen Williams, who I think will
Yeah.
still be a multi-year starter for Penn State as well, he gets a lot of the attention because he was a five-star guy.
Alex Birchmeier was
But
a high recruit too.
exactly, and I think both of those guys will get their time at Penn State. Don't worry about that. But I always had a feeling that Anthony Donko could end up being the best of the three, and it looks like he might end up being that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's way too soon to say, but he's on the right track, and if he continues, to build on that game and go into the off season and have a good off season, I could easily see him being the starting right tackle next year.
Yeah, and that'll be really interesting to watch because Penn State does have to replace Hunter Norzad. They have to replace Caden Walls, and they also have to replace Olu Fashanu on the offensive line. Drew Shelton had a tough game, but I don't think Penn State fans should be too concerned about that. I think with another full off season under his belt, entering what would be his third year, I think he can settle into that left tackle role pretty nice in the next season as well.
Yeah, I think one thing the transfer portal has conveniently made us all forget is that guys still develop. Guys still get better over an off season with first team reps. There is a difference between getting first team reps and getting second or third team reps.
Yeah.
So, these guys, what you saw on the field from some of these guys, like Drew Shelton on the defensive side, like Cam Miller, Zion Tracy, those are not the guys that they will be 8 months from now, or at least I hope they're not. They shouldn't be. So, we'll see how they develop and how things go over the course of the off season, but things will improve.
And of course, I forgot to mention JB Nelson, also barring a surprise, set to return next year for Penn State. He was questionable for the game, only played one snap, but he's going to factor into that starting offensive line as well, most likely.
Oh, most definitely. That was a bigger loss than I think people realize.
For sure. Any other thoughts on the offense? I mean, Bo Prabula had a touchdown throw, a little bit of a lame duck pass, but he got it to Nicholas Singleton, ran it for the touchdown. But I did think the offense, when Prabula is on the field throughout the season, did have a little bit of a spark, but I still think he has a way to go as a passer. So, I mean, it's hard to evaluate Prabula this season. He's nice, I think, to have as that gadget type quarterback and here and there, but I think it's hard to trust him for any sort of extensive playing time right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded seeing a little bit more of Bo in the second half,
Especially when
just
they're
because,
struggling in the third quarter.
especially when they were struggling to complete any passes in the third quarter. It wouldn't have been a bad thing to me to get that running threat in there. Might have opened things up for Singleton or Allen a little bit more with the defense knowing they have to account for Prabula's legs.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think it would have made a big difference. But who knows? Maybe it sparked something. But yeah, Prabula's still got a ways to go as a passer. I know he had that touchdown, but that was as much as mostly Singleton as much as it was Prabula.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's not the answer moving forward. I don't know about long term, but at least for next year. But I still think he has a role in this offense. I think Colton Nicky could use him creatively, and I think we'll see a decent amount of him next year as a change of pace guy.
Let's flip sides to the defense. Again, we mentioned at the top, it was not the Penn State defense we've grown to know this season. Now 38 points, 540 yards total offense. But as we mentioned, I mean, no Kalen King, no Johnny Dixon. Curtis Jacobs played just 26 snaps. Disa Isaac played 20. No Chop Robinson in the game either. And then you saw Abdul Carter get injured and was never 100%. Kobe King went down with an injury for a little bit in the game as well. It was a tough performance, but I'm not sure Penn State fans should be hitting the panic button on this defense heading into next season. I still think this is a Penn State defense that, after an offseason, after guys continue to develop, it's going to be, and I've said this for weeks, it's still going to be a top 15 to 20 defense next season. Is it going to be the same level of defense as this year? Absolutely not. But this will be a defense that gives you a chance to win almost any given week.
Yeah, listen, no one should really be saying much about the defense. When you factor in everything you just said, it's not really surprising they gave up 38 points. They trotted out their second and third string defense for 75% of that game. No team is, even with a defense as good as Penn State's this year, no team is going to be able to withstand that, especially going up against a team who's one of the best offenses in the country. So
who has three 800-plus yard wide receivers and a tight end that they figured out how to use like in the last month of the season, who had the biggest game of his college career at the right time.
Not to mention their hands had like sticky glue on them or something. Not literally. Yeah. They could not drop any.
Jackson Dart was making NFL throws, and they were making highlight reel catches throughout the entire first half.
Yeah, he's back next year, by the way, for them. Like Ole Miss, not to turn this into an Ole Miss podcast, but they're probably going to be contenders for the SEC next year because
they should enter. They should enter next season as a top 10 team,
borderline top 5. But regardless, not the point. Like this defense was just
being said,
undermanned the whole game, and I know we'll talk about the corners a little bit. Like I know they got cooked a little bit throughout the game, but I guess it was to be expected. I thought Cam Miller still made some nice plays from time to time.
Yeah, he got picked on a lot, but he had a tough matchup.
He did. He got picked on quite a bit. But again, it's really hard to go from a backup to a starting spot against an elite offense and expect our corners to be like at the level that King and Dixon would have been. And even I think even King and Dixon would have had trouble in that game.
I think Penn State could have survived perhaps losing one of Kalen King or Johnny Dixon. Once they lost both, there was no chance they were going to be able to withstand Ole Miss's passing attack.
Yeah, I think that was an underrated aspect that a lot of people did not focus on.
But Kalen King, like Fashanu, was practicing until the whole week, and then on game day it comes out that neither were playing. When did Penn State know that Kalen King wasn't going to play? I think is the ultimate question, because you can only prepare so much for that once you're done practicing. You can only walkthroughs can only do so much.
Yeah, and my concern or my issue with that, I don't know when that decision was made. I don't know if it was last minute or whatever, but you're taking reps away during the practice week that are valuable for Miller and Tracy.
Exactly, which James Franklin has always said about the benefit of bowl practices is like extra development time.
Yeah, I don't know how much he was practicing. Like maybe he was, only there for short windows. I don't know, but I wasn't there. But any reps that he was taking away from those guys are too many. If he knew the whole time that he wasn't going to play. Yeah. So that's the only thing that disappoints me. Listen, King is going to be and Fashanu is obviously going to be a top 5 pick. King is probably like a early second, late first kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like, go get your money. It's fine, whatever. But, that was my only issue. Don't take the reps away that they clearly needed.
And also, with the secondary, and the one thing they really couldn't afford with the losses was Daquan Hardy having maybe his worst game of the season. He got matched up a lot with Caden Prescorn. Prescorn went off against him, 4 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown against Hardy. It's really unfortunate for Hardy, who's set to go pro, because that's an unfortunate last game tape to put on your film. But Penn State, once they lost those two, and then compound that with a poor performance from Daquan Hardy, it's not surprised that Ole Miss had the success they did.
Yeah, listen, it looked like a young defense out there. It looked like an inexperienced defense. There were missed assignments. There were blown coverages. There were just things that you normally don't see from a Penn State defense because that wasn't Penn State's normal defense.
Right.
So that stuff will get cleaned up as those guys get more reps over the summer. I think they'll look to bring in another corner, preferably a veteran, just to kind of shore up that room a little bit. But I think those guys will be fine at the end of the day. But yeah, you'd like to see them bring in a corner just to help shore that up.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is this, and SEC fans, Ole Miss fans will say differently, but this wasn't a game that Ole Miss won because Ole Miss, of SEC speed. Penn State had, I think, the better athletes on the field for the most part. The big difference was Ole Miss has wide receivers that Penn State does not. And that's one position where they definitely have the advantage. But you look at the Penn State pass rush, I know they only had 1 sack in the game, but they were getting consistent pressure on Jackson Dart in this game. I thought the defensive ends, for the most part, played. Denai Dennis Sutton was really good. He had 4 pressures in that game. Abdul Carter, before getting shot blocked, was flying around the field.
He looked like Micah in that Memphis game in 2019. I thought he was ready to explode onto the scene if he didn't already.
Exactly. Agreed. Vanover was solid. I thought Penn State's front 7, for the most part, played really well. Penn State was having a lot of success against one of the best running backs in the country, too, in Crenshaw Judkins. It just, everything started breaking down once the defense got gassed because the offense couldn't stay on the field for most of the game.
Yeah, I thought the funniest part for me was when, not that it was funny, but when Rojas got hurt and had to come out, Curtis Jacobs had to come back in, and he immediately comes in and gets a 3rd down stop.
Yeah.
I was like, to me, that just symbolized like the full strength defense. This game would have been so much different. I know we said it like 6 different times and 6 different ways.
But it's the truth.
It's the truth. And Ole Miss fans, I think even rational Ole Miss fans even know that. They know that this game, they won't admit that maybe they wouldn't have won. And I'm not ready to say that either. But
no, I think you said at the top. I think you said at the top. Penn State either probably loses this game by 3, 4, 5 points or wins this game fully healthy. not even healthy, fully, with the full talent available to them. But, that's not where college football is right now. We can talk about that in a minute. But overall, the defense, poor performance, but I don't think there's anything to hit the panic button on, because you look at Penn State going into next year, your safety room for the Nittany Lions is going to be very good. Kevin Winston Jr. had a great game.
He's a stud.
Yeah, you said it before we came on. Potential day 1, day 2 draft pick. Jalen Reed had a really solid game. Zakee Wheatley had a really solid game as well. And you have more guys coming in at that spot too. Cornerback, I do think they need to add a piece at some point. I don't think you can go into next year with what you have and be fully confident in that they're going to be able to step up to where they need to be development-wise. But there are plenty of pieces there to be hopeful about, optimistic about. Linebacker is mostly fine. If you can find the right guy there, so be it. And the defensive end is fine. So I think really the only spots that you're like they absolutely need to add somebody is cornerback and maybe defensive tackle. You probably want to add a DT there. They do get Alonzo Ford Jr. back next season after missing this season with an injury. That will help the depth. But as you also mentioned, coming on, you're going to return your 2 starters next year at DT in Durant and Kazai Izzard. So what can you really find in the transfer portal at that point?
Yeah, then that is the challenge with a defensive tackle. I do agree. A guy for like being third in that rotation would be great, but it's really hard to bring in a quality player and tell him, hey, we want you to be, competing for a starting spot in theory, but you're really probably going to be third in that rotation, and convince him to come here when he's going to have other options where he can be a starter. So that is tough. I think it can be done, but because the third guy in the rotation at defensive tackle still plays quite a bit, but again, that's a tough sell. So we'll see if they can get that done. But yeah, I think you're fine everywhere else besides corner and DD.
Yeah, if you can add a corner, adding I don't think it can be just a body at corner. I think it needs to be somebody you can rely on to come in and, if not be a starter, be a very high in the rotation type
guy. Absolutely.
But overall, I think we both agree this is a defense that's going to probably be top 15 to 20 next year in the country. Not going to be the level that this was this year, but this was an all-time Penn State defense, which makes what they did or did not do this season even more unfortunate for the program. But with Tom Allen leading the defense, I think the Nittany Lions are in good hands on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think it'll be still a good group. Not an elite defense, but still a good one.
Sure. Now, what were we going to go back to there? Crap.
You talked about potentially like the state of like bowl games.
Oh yeah,
with
and I think that's
Florida State.
Yep, I think that's something that we really, as an industry, need to have a conversation on. Is what do we want bowl games to be? Because you look at the New Year's 6 bowl games, 3 of the 6 bowl games and 3 or 4 that were not in the college football playoffs were pretty impacted by either opt-outs or transfer portal. Florida State doesn't win that game. Florida State doesn't win that game, I think, no matter who the quarterback is. But if they have their full team available to them, maybe they win that game. But Florida State was decimated by the transfer portal and by opt-outs. That game was terrible. Ohio State didn't have a ton of opt-outs or transfer portal guys, but enough to make a major difference. I mean, they had no quarterback in the game. They missed Marvin Harrison Jr. Missouri played a very good game. You credit Missouri for that, but And then the last one was Penn State and Ole Miss, which was majorly impacted by opt-outs on Penn State's side of things. I mean, it's a bad product, is what it is. At the end of the day, it's not fair to the fans who are putting in hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars, to travel to see your team play in these destination bowl games. I think it's a poor product. It's going to turn a lot of people off about college football in general. And at this point, bowl games are and have been for the last few years, but continue to be just glorified. James Franklin likes to say bowl games are in a way the beginning of the next season. If they're the beginning of the next season, these are just glorified preseason games at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. Let's start with this. Obviously, the 12-team playoff is coming. That's going to change.
That's
for
going
the New
to
Year's
help
6
a little bit.
Yeah, for the New Year's 6, you should see significantly less, if not the complete removal of opt-outs. So
right.
The New Year's 6 will be fine moving forward. And maybe people don't really care about the non-New Year's 6 games anyway. So if people opt out of those games, it's just kind of whatever. And
Still
I think
unfortunate
at that point,
for their fans, but yes, I agree.
But I do agree, and I think a lot of people moving forward, if your team isn't in the playoff, a lot of people aren't going to make the effort to go out to those games unless they just wanted to go to that city anyway and just wanted to make a vacation of it. And the bowl game itself was the secondary piece to their vacation, so be it. But I agree. It's going to turn a lot of people off. And I do think it's unfair that, a lot of people spent hundreds or thousands of dollars and they came out to see a much different Penn State team than the one they were expecting.
And that is what's really unfortunate about that is, and I'm not blaming I'm not saying anybody was really deceptive about it. I'm not saying anybody on Penn State's side of things were deceptive about it, but up until 2 hours before kickoff, everybody was expecting a much different Penn State team than the one that ultimately showed up when the clock hit 15 minutes in the first quarter. And yeah, there's none of the guys that opted out completely were going to play the entire game. But if Penn State even has some of those guys for the first half, maybe they don't win that game, but it's a much more competitive game than it would have ultimately ended up being.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw it across the country. Like Ohio State had absolutely no offense.
Yeah, they almost got shut out by Missouri, which again, credit Missouri, but Missouri shouldn't be shutting out Ohio State.
No. Like, if they had Kyle McCord, I'm fully convinced Ohio State wins that game.
Yes.
Well, McCord and Harrison. Ohio State wins that game.
Yeah. So. Even if they just have Harrison, I think they win that game. Though McCord certainly would have helped once Devin Brown went down with an injury. And I don't want to get us wrong. I don't blame players for opting out. I fully get it from a business point of view, but it is unfortunate of where things currently are in college football, and it impacted 3 of the top 6 college football games of the bowl season, and that's very unfortunate for the product as a whole. Okay, so we talked about the offense, we talked about defense, kind of talked about their needs. On the offense side of the ball, wide receiver is a need in the portal. Probably if they can add an offensive lineman, you wouldn't mind at either cornerback they need on the defense side of the ball and defensive tackle especially. Not especially, but as well. And then if you could find a linebacker, great. Beyond that, Anthony, we mentioned Ole Miss enter next season as a top 10, top 5 team. I'll be very interested to see where this Penn State team ends up next year. Wasn't going to talk about this originally, but you brought it up to my mind. Right now, where do you think you would place this Penn State team heading into next year? Do you think this is a top 15 team? I'm not sure it's a top 10 team on paper, but I feel like this is definitely a top 20 team that probably slides in somewhere between 12 and 16 to start next season.
Yeah, I was going to say somewhere between 15 and 20. I could see them being 12 or 13. I don't know where they end up. It's actually very interesting to find out, but I don't think they'll be a top 10 team or anything to start the year.
No, yeah, I agree on top 10, but I think overall this is still a team that Penn State fans should be optimistic about heading into next season, but there's also plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. I mean, if they don't clean up the wide receiver room, there's a very good chance that next year is a rinse and repeat of 2023.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's absolutely a must. Overall, I guess, just as we wrap this up, the 2023 season for you. Disappointment. Would you call it a disappointment?
Probably because my expectations were 11-1, but it's pretty interesting because when you think about it, the only way they were getting to the playoff at 11-1 was if they beat Michigan.
Yes.
And Michigan's probably going to win the national championship this year. So I'm not even considering that as a realistic possibility. Even if they beat Ohio State and went 11-1, all that would have done for them was put them in that New Year's Six game against Missouri. Like, it's crazy to think that we said, 11-1 probably gets them in the playoff. This was the one year where it probably wouldn't have, although you'd have the win against Ohio State. And it's also a catch-22 because if they beat Ohio State, does Mike Yurcich get fired? Do you hire Andy Coltonicki? Are you pushing the offensive problems? Are you just kicking the can down the road another year? It's right. Kind of an interesting catch-22 to think about, especially if Coltonicki ends up being a really good offensive coordinator here, which is obviously still to be determined. But overall, yes, disappointment considering they had an elite defense, a national championship level defense, and they squandered it with poor or mediocre at best offensive performance. However, probably realistically what most people outside of Penn State's world expected them to do. So,
yeah, I mean, this is I would definitely. I mean, I projected this team to go 11-1, and ultimately they fell short of that expectation. I would probably have to classify this under a wasted season for Penn State, just because you had the generational defense that could have won you a national championship, and even if not win you a national championship, it could have allowed you to get to the college football playoff, allowed you to maybe win a college football playoff game, if not win a national championship. But it was the offense that ultimately held this team back, and that wide receiver room, we didn't expect it to be an elite wide receiver room, but I think it is alarming of where that wide receiver room is headed to this offseason, because ultimately for Penn State, there does not seem to be many quick fixes right now for this wide receiver room. Yes, if they add Julian Fleming, that's going to help. I think Julian Fleming can come in and be a really good number one wide receiver for them, and that will open up opportunities for others. But just adding Julian Fleming isn't pushing Penn State any higher up the pecking order of the Big Ten next year. Now you can argue others are going to fall down. I think Washington, no matter if they win the national championship or not, is not going to be the same Washington next season. Who knows what Michigan looks like next season? Is Jim Harbaugh there? Is J.J. McCarthy there? I think this is Michigan's best chance to win a national championship in the foreseeable future. They're obviously just one step away. What is Ohio State going to be? Who is Ohio State's quarterback going to be?
That's a great question. Probably Will Howard, which is going to be an interesting dynamic because he's from Downingtown. But
does Will Howard make Ohio State any better than Kyle McCord made them this year?
Not really. Maybe marginally at best, but I don't know. I don't really think it does.
What is USC going to be? I mean, I know Miller Moss had a really great performance in the holiday. What bowl game was that?
Yeah, listen, Louisville's defense is not very good. He tore them up, absolutely tore them to shreds.
But a lot of that was also just having great wide receivers at his disposal.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he earned his starting spot for next year. He absolutely did.
Most importantly with USC, how will the defense improve? If the defense doesn't improve, none of this matters. So we'll see what USC is. Oregon, we don't know what Oregon's going to be without Bo Nix.
Thank God we don't play Oregon anyway. So
that is true. Penn State would only play Oregon in a potential Big Ten championship game. But in terms of the pecking order, where they fit.
Listen, the biggest wild card to me next year is how good is Washington going to be? Because You're losing Michael Penix. You're losing Roma Dunze. You're probably losing McMillan. That offense, as they're bringing in Will Rogers. They got that kid Jeremiah Hunter from Cal, who's pretty good. It's still going to be a good offense, but it's not going to be a national
Well,
championship
yeah, Will
level.
Rogers isn't a Michael Penix Jr. level. And here's the other thing. I know they just lit up a good, sorry, not a good Texas defense. That Texas defense, not as good as many people thought it was. And it was actually one of the worst passing defenses in the country this year in terms of efficiency. I don't think Washington or Oregon are going to be able to have the same level of offensive success in the Big Ten that they had in the Pac-12. Much different.
Well, they also had really good 6th-year quarterbacks that
exactly.
A lot of experience there made up for a lot of it.
They're going to be good teams next year, but they're not going to be. I don't think either is going to be necessarily world beaters next year. Maybe Oregon, but I don't expect Washington to match this same level.
Oh yeah, listen, you're probably going to get Washington. We'll save this more for season previews, but We're probably going to get Washington in the whiteout. Ohio State, I still expect them to be good, but question marks are still there. They don't have their quarterback issue solved, in my opinion, at least not as of now.
Right.
UCLA, Lord knows what they're going to be. I mean, there's still the potential for Penn State to go 10-2 next year. And there's also the potential for it to go 8-4. So that's the thing.
That's my point. Is the Big Ten is expanding. Yes, it's adding 3 really good teams and a team in UCLA that's, pretty good in its own right. But despite adding all these good teams, despite having Ohio State, despite having a team that may very well win a national championship next Monday, 2 teams, a Big Ten team in 2024 will be the defending national champions. Despite having the defending national champions in the conference, whoever that may be, and everybody else, the Big Ten is still kind of wide open next year. Because, like you said, Washington and Oregon lose 6-year quarterbacks. USC, we really don't know what they're going to be. Michigan, we really don't know what they're going to be. They'll probably still be pretty damn good, but we don't know if they're going to be this good. Ohio State, we don't know what they're going to be. It's wide open for Penn State. It's going to come down to, I think, if Drew can take that next step and how they can find answers at a wide receiver.
I saw something.
Go ahead.
I saw something that said Michigan currently has 44 seniors. I don't think they're not like all 60-year seniors or anything like that, but 44 seniors on their roster. That is an egregious amount of upperclassmen.
Right.
And it makes sense as to why, this was their window.
Yeah.
Like yes, they're probably going to win a national championship next week. But that team next year, it's probably still going to be good, or at least some level of good.
But is it going to be undefeated national champion level good? No, probably not.
They are going to have a little bit of a fall back to normalcy, which is probably still like 9-3, 10-2.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a much different team, and they might not even have their head coach. So
yeah, and if they don't have their head coach, what does J.J. McCarthy choose to do?
Yeah.
What does J.J. McCarthy choose to do no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, McCarthy's probably going to go pro. Their running backs are both probably going to be gone, at least Corum for sure.
Yeah, I think
I don't know how the wide receiver room looks, but a whole offensive line, I'm pretty sure, is gone. Like at least 4 of them. Like it's just
about the wide receiver room. It wasn't explosive to begin with outside of Roman Wilson.
Yeah, it's just going to be a completely different team. So again, it's wide open. If Penn State could patch some holes and figure things out, it's wide open for them. But we'll see what happens.
perhaps, just thinking next year, and we'll wrap it up with this. Perhaps Michigan this year has set the template of what Penn State needs to do in 2024.
Yeah,
Michigan doesn't have many explosive wide receivers, right? But they have really one good one in Roman Wilson that helps. Now, J.J. McCarthy is a mobile quarterback to a bigger degree than Drew, but they rely on a heavy running game. They have a passing game that can have success with good play calling and one really good wide receiver. And they have a very good defense to go with them. That maybe is perhaps the formula for Penn State next year.
Yeah, Penn State spent the last, 5-6 years trying to create a team that emulates Ohio State. Maybe they need to start trying to emulate Michigan. They got the running game to do it. I don't know if they have the offensive line to do it, but they've got the running game.
But ultimately, I think right now Penn State fans, despite feeling bad about the loss in the Peach Bowl, despite feeling bad about what would be a wasted 2023, shouldn't be hitting the panic button overall on the 2024 season. Shouldn't be riding the Nittany Lions off yet in the 2024 season. There's still plenty to be optimistic about. There's plenty to be pessimistic about as well. But this Penn State team for 2024 still has a lot of pieces to work with and could still very well, in my opinion, be in the conversation to make the college football playoffs next year.
Yep. I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
All right. Well, with that, everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Callaghan-Croley. He's our resident super fan, Anthony Hazan. We'll be back at it probably next week to discuss Penn State, head into the offseason, and much more. Until then, have a great start of your new year here in 2024. Happy New Year to you all, and we'll talk to you all real soon.